Stoic philosophy has really helped me through this time. In particular, the quote Amor Fati, which I wove into the film because I just found it so powerful and I use it in my life. It's the most simple mantra for me to get through some of the roughest times of my life.
I love the movie, although I will say I finished the second half on an airplane, and that was maybe an awkward choice.
Because you were going to be emotional?
Yes, very much so. I mean, it was the second half of the movie is devastating, and then ultimately sort of redeeming, but quite devastating. Yeah. I probably should have watched it alone in my house.
Yeah, well, that's my favorite kind of film, to be honest. I really am drawn to things that make us think about our own lives and hurt a little bit in a good way, because they make us self-reflective, and at a certain point we hold our heart and go, ouch. But also I try and do my own specific tone where you're kind of laughing throughout, which is how I feel these situations are. You know, when one goes through grief, there are moments where laughter is saving you. And so I tried to write a film. If I'm going to write a film about grief and addiction and redemption, I wanted to have it be like my own experience of that, which involved a lot of laughter.
When your own experience, it's been a rough couple of years, right?
Yeah, I lost my sister first to an aneurysm. She had an aneurysm in 2016 and survived for a couple of years as just a shell of herself. And then passed. And then my father didn't, he was 84, but he was defeated by cancer pretty soon after that. I think it just took such a toll on him. And then during COVID, during lockdown, my best friend moved into my guest house because his name is Nick Cordero. He was a beloved Broadway star, and he and his wife, Amanda Klutz, and their baby moved into, I have this little guest cottage behind my house, and they moved into it while they were searching for a home in LA. They found a home in LA, and then they went back to New York to get their things. And when they came back, he got COVID so bad he was hospitalized and fought it as long and hard as he could. But he was defeated by it at 41 years old. So I really, really have been grieving a lot in the last 4 years or more, and you know, when I sat down to write something authentic during the pandemic, that's all my brain really wanted to talk about.
Yeah, when I having been somewhat familiar with that, there's this quote by Borges that I was thinking of when I watched your movie, and tell me if you think it applies. He says, "A writer, and I believe generally all persons, must think that whatever happens to him or her is a resource. All things have been given to us for a purpose, and an artist must feel this more intensely. All that happens to us, including our humiliations, our misfortunes, our embarrassments, all is given to us as raw material, as clay, so that we may shape our art." I think about it as far as everyone goes through grief and devastation and loss, but the one benefit that artists have, the one solace that artists have that other people don't get, is the ability or the tools or the canvas to create something out of that, you know, gives us something to throw ourselves into, and then also is maybe good or useful or reassuring to other people in that process.
Yeah. I hear that. Hold on. First of all, that's so well said, and I completely agree. But before I go into the answer, I just want just one technical thing. It says Riverside will record your video in 1080p. Logitech cameras such as this one are known to lower the video. Is that okay to keep a high frame rate? Riverside will record video. I just want to make sure I'm not
totally
fine.
No, what it shows us is not what's being recorded, so we're all good.
Okay, good. I just didn't want to be fucking up. That is so well said, Ryan, and that's how I feel. You know, if I feel the best storytelling that I know how to do is when I write from my experience and write from a very authentic place, for better or for worse. That's what I did when I wrote Garden State at 25 years old. I was just writing, a version of my life, not necessarily exactly my life at all, but what I was obsessing about, what was keeping me depressed and anxious. And I thought, gosh, there's got to be some people out there. It might be 25 or 30 people, but there's got to be somebody else out there who can relate to this, because I'm not that unusual or weird. There's got to be people that can relate. And that's what I did with this one too. Is I just kind of I felt, well, let me write about this. And I should say I don't write about the specific anecdotes I told you about my family, but I used that pain, and I used that pain and that desire to stand back up from it, and funneled it into a story. And also my witnessing of people that are on the front lines, because, Amanda Klutz, who's Nick's widow, is one of my best friends. And I watched how, I just remember thinking, how is this woman going to stand back up? This is devastating. I'm devastated, and I'm his friend, and I'm not assigned to raise a baby now alone. Sure. I'm not assigned to try and make a living now alone without a partner. And we just bought a house. And I just remember thinking, fucking hell, this woman has been thrown so much on her plate. And then I watched community surround her and love surround her from all angles. And I thought, that's what I want to write about. I want to write about how we stand up again and the power of friendship and love to help us do it.
That's a really interesting word there that you use, though, assigned. It's a very Stoic idea, I would say. The idea that the thing that happened, or the scenario or future that one is looking at, that it's something that was assigned. I mean, we could debate who did the assigning, but that is an interesting way of looking at it, that it's fundamentally something that you don't have a choice about, that was chosen for you. And now what's left is what you're going to do with it.
Right. And that has been so helpful. I knew nothing. I have to say, you really are, like, I'm sure for so many people, were my entry point into Stoicism. I stumbled upon you, and then of course it led me to some readings, and now of course my Instagram feed thinks that I aspired to be an expert. But I really want to thank you in all sincerity, Ryan, because some of this Stoic philosophy has really helped me through this time. And in particular, the quote "Amor Fati," which I wove into the film, because I just found it so powerful, and I use it in my life. It's the most simple mantra for me to get through some of the roughest times of my life. So I have you to credit for that. So I want to thank you.
You have it tattooed on your arm, right?
I did. I put it on my wrist. It's interesting. I have it tattooed. I wrote it into the film as a Morgan Freeman's character is a man who's experienced a lot of grief himself, and he has 10 years sober. He's a recovering alcoholic. We learned that he was a Newark cop, so he's lived a very tough life, both as an alcoholic and dealing with the intensity of being a cop on the streets of Newark. And he has a lot of regrets in his life. And I put it as a moment in the film where Florence Pugh's character clocks that he has it tattooed on his wrist as a way of being a mantra for himself. He doesn't really tell her what it means until later in the film. But of course, a lot of people that listen to you will know the phrase. So yeah, it's sort of a because it was so meaningful to me and powerful to me. I had it tattooed in the same spot that I put it on Morgan in the film, right under my right wrist.
I love that so much. Yeah, I carry this with me. I don't have it tattooed. I've got some other Stoic tattoos, but it is helpful. I think, it's one thing to sort of intellectually understand that the situations we face in life are assigned to us, and that we can argue about them or complain about them or fight against them, or we can sort of accept them and love them and use them to be better. But there is something I think helpful about like little reminders that sort of catch you when you want to spiral in the other direction. That's also
Yes.
what, 12-step groups are fundamentally about too. It's just little sort of reminders.
Absolutely. And reminders, and also in that particular example you just gave about what you can control and what you can't control.
Yes.
I think when you feel out of control, whether it's through grief or sadness or trauma that's showing up in your life, it's very helpful. I mean, I'm not in a 12-step program, but of course I did research for this film, and it's to me, someone who's not working a program, that phrase is very helpful to zoom out and focus on what I can control and what I can't control, and also that there is something very powerful to knowing that if I choose to love this, there might be something quite glorious that comes out of it that I never could have imagined. And that can be incredibly hard to see at the time. But I do think that there are blessings in disguise.
When I wrote The Daily Stoic 8 years ago, I had this crazy idea that I would just keep it going. The book was 366 meditations, but I'd write one more every single day and I'd give it away for free as an email. I thought maybe a few people would sign up. Couldn't have even comprehended a future in which 750,000 people would get this email every single day and would for almost a decade. If you want to get the email, if you want to be part of a community that is the largest group of Stoics ever assembled in human history, I'd love for you to join us. You can sign up and get the email totally for free. No spam. You can unsubscribe whenever you want at dailystoic.com/email. I share your sort of marveling with certain people. You're like, how does this person get out of bed in the morning? Like I didn't really fully understand it until the pandemic, but I was thinking about, so Marcus Aurelius, he has all these hopes and dreams for what being emperor is going to be like. He's this smart guy. He wants to be a good person. Then this pandemic, this plague happens. Then like people start dying. He buries half of his children before they reach adulthood.
Wow.
And you just think like, there's this idea that Stoicism is somehow like a pessimistic philosophy. And then I think like the fact that this dude stayed alive, that he kept going, that he woke up every day and got out of bed, let alone, was nice to people or worked hard or, wrote things down. It's an incredible testament to the sheer resilience and fortitude of some human beings, but I think fundamentally what human beings are capable. Like we are a remarkably resilient species. And I try to remind myself that we're the descendants of people like that, who got their asses kicked, who had their hearts broken, who had everything that could go wrong a million times. Like those are our parents and our grandparents and our great grandparents. We come from that stock.
Yeah. But at times, it can be so hard to imagine going on for some people, and that's what I wanted to write about. Just the and of course in the film I use a tremendous tragedy. It's in the trailer, so I can say that it's a fatal car accident. But I wanted to write it in such a way that people saw themselves in it. You don't necessarily have to have something as horrible. You might, or it could be, a divorce or losing your job or being broke or whatever your thing is. I really wanted to craft it in such a way that it was really about standing up no matter what the thing that brought you down is. My hope is that people will relate to Florence Pugh's character and see themselves in her, because we've all, if you're a human being that's been alive and you're an adult, you've had things that brought you to your knees. You've had things that made you, most likely made you go, how do I pick myself up again? How do I start over?
When it's not just that life can bring you on your knees, but that the course of your life can change in an instant, right? Like the trajectory of one's life, everything you thought you had earned, that you'd cobbled together, that you thought was laid out before you as the character sort of experiences in those very early moments of the movie. And then all of a sudden, everything is fundamentally different and will never be the same again. Sometimes it's your fault.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's not.
Yeah. Yeah. And the question is how? How do you process this?
Yes.
I mean, anyone whose life has changed in a split second started that day thinking it would be just like any other day.
Yes.
I mean, think about everyone. I mean, I'm sorry if this is too dark, but my brain just instantly went to 9/11. Think about everyone that was affected by 9/11,
Yes.
directly and indirectly, and everyone who went to work that day thinking this is just another day. And of course, in a again on a smaller scale, it's like it could be your partner. You realize your partner was having an affair. You get fired. These things that just happen in an instant. Even Garden State, the whole impetus for the whole story really is that there was a malfunctioned quarter-inch piece of plastic on the family dishwasher, and the door kept falling open. It's the reason. He was a little boy and he pushed his mom, and it's the reason she became a paraplegic. I guess I'm really fascinated by those moments because they can change our lives so drastically. And then is the big work. Then is the Sisyphean, it feels like, work of how do I then get back up,
Yes. What I think that's been the function of tragedy and theater and now cinema and I guess television for thousands of years, which is to sort of play those scenarios out for us so we can sort of go there, but for the grace of God go I. What would I do in
Absolutely.
that scenario? And to realize that ultimately this isn't just something you're watching on television or on the stage, but something that could happen to you tomorrow when you wake up.
In fact, I guess it's a mild spoiler but I'll just to give the story. I was very careful that what Allison is doing on her phone is not something egregious. I was very specific that everyone watching would say there, but for the grace of God, go I. Because
Sure.
she's just using the Maps app on her phone. Who doesn't use the Map app on their phone? So I was very specific that it wasn't she was texting or on Instagram or whatever. She was doing something that many people will be able to say there, but for the grace of God, go I.
Yeah, I think that's a really powerful part of the movie, which is that ultimately whose fault it is when something is so tragic and devastating and life-altering for you and people around you, the idea that someone is to blame is so insufficient and ultimately meaningless, right? Like, obviously some of the characters cling to blame or not, but in the end, it doesn't really matter. What matters is that it happened, and now everyone has to live in the fallout of that new reality that can never be undone.
Yes, and also what now? Like, how do we start? Allison literally says, "How do I do this?" She says to Morgan Freeman, when they're both experiencing the same grief and trying to go at it alone. And when they finally are through circumstances end up in a diner booth opposite one another, she says to the senior citizen with more life experience and more sobriety experience and more just life experience, how do I do this? And he says it takes work. And she just can't fathom that this is comebackable.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And that's how I felt. I have a friends who lost a 9-year-old. And you just can't. There's no words. You can't. You go. How do you do it? How do you do it? And they will. They're strong and they're surrounded by love and they're surrounded by support and they will. but it's such a human and relatable story that that's why I was drawn to it.
And I think it's important. Obviously, I wrote a book called The Obstacle Is the Way, and we're talking about Amor Fati. It's very easy to be glib, like, oh, you take this devastating, tragic, terrible thing, and through the power of thought and imagination, it's transformed into a positive. And that's so demeaning to the reality of those people's situations and the immensity of the struggle before them. It's that, one, it will be an incredible amount of work. Two, it will take a lot of time. But from that work and from that time, there can come something beautiful and positive and ultimately filled with meaning. It's not something that you would have chosen, right? It's not like, oh, I'm so glad this happened, but that life does continue on, and that, one of the things that the human species has the capability to do, which I think that quote we were talking about earlier is about, we had the ability to derive meaning and wisdom and insight and community from these devastating things that have happened. And that's the positive. It's not really anything more than that.
And absolutely. And you know what? Amanda Klutz, my friend who lost her husband, she went on to write a book that was incredibly inspirational and moving. I mean, just as an example of that, now that book will go on to help others who are it's like you said about art coming out of something. I do believe that, and Morgan, I don't want to spoil anything, but Morgan's character, Morgan Freeman's character in A Good Person, sees how even through the devastation, there are ways in which his life was changed in a positive way. Even he can see the glimmer of light in the darkness of from what's happened to him.
And it's not easy for him, right? Like, I think that's one of to me the moving parts of the movie is they sort of re-encounter each other, and he thinks, this is a test. I'm going to be better for this. I'm going to use this as a learning experience. And it doesn't go the way that he planned, right? Like, it doesn't work out the way that he planned. And it usually doesn't. He's a religious man. He's a religious, Christian religious man. And I think he really is pretty certain that God is on a platter providing a test for him. And he sees it so clearly as that. And he is he believes he's up to the task. He's going to show God that he can't be broken. And of course, it doesn't go the way he plans at all. Yeah, there's a Hemingway line. I think it's in the end of A Farewell to Arms, where he says, he's like, there are people in this world who are so strong that they can't break. And he says, but eventually the world breaks everyone. And the ones that don't break, it kills. The ones who don't break, the world kills. But the ones who do break are allowed to become stronger at the broken places. Right. And I think
that's an amazing quote.
It's so good. I mean, there's also that Japanese art kintsugi where, the shattered bowl is put together with gold or silver as the glue. Yeah. I don't know if you've ever seen this.
Yeah.
It's sort of that idea. But I think that's the idea in the movie is he kind of thinks like, my sobriety is so strong, my will is so strong, I'll be able to get through this. And it's actually not until he is humbled by life and the challenge that he has the ability to grow and change and actually pass whatever that test really is.
Yeah, that's well said. And I love that quote. Will you please send that to me? I want to put that on my mirror.
It's at the end of A Farewell to Arms when it's actually really, so Hemingway, has this great quote that the first line of the first draft of everything is shit, right? And he rewrote the ending to A Farewell to Arms like 20 or 30 times. And so I think there's some version of the quote in the final draft, but there's like a better version in one of the many drafts. But this is at the end where his wife dies in childbirth or the baby dies in childbirth. I forget what it is, but there's this sort of devastating moment like we're talking about. And he's sort of faced with this exact idea, which is like, do you carry on or not?
Yeah, I love that, and I want to send that to my friends who are grieving right now the loss of their child, because I think that you're always searching for a way to help people through this, and I've realized that just showing up is some and being present and being loving and being supportive is all you can do. I recently read in a book by a rabbi who said, "Don't ever write someone if there's please reach out if there's anything I can do, because then you're putting the burden of the responsibility onto the person who certainly is in no place to have more burden put on them." So he said, I think it's Stephen
You
Leader
should
who
reach
writes
out.
this. Yeah, just do it. Don't even reach out. Just do it. He said,
Yes.
a very common. This is a rabbi who's dealt, who's counseled thousands and thousands of people through grief, and he said the very common reaction is to say, "Please let me know if there's anything I can do." He says, "Don't write that." He said, "What you're doing without you mean well, but what you're doing is you're putting the burden of reaching out onto them." He goes, "Just do it. Whatever you had planned, just do it. Come over with bagels and coffee or whatever, and just be there and be present and let them talk and be there. But certainly don't say, please reach out if you're anything, because they're never going to."
Well, I think it's you don't want to be an imposition and you don't want to bother them. But actually, I think one of the things you can do is by sort of taking the onus or the initiative is like they'll tell you if it's too much, if they don't want it. And to say like, I'll take the social awkwardness of you saying, "Hey, like I want to be alone right now,"
Yes.
or "Hey, I don't really need anything," or not responding to 20 texts in a row. Like being willing to be the bigger, more secure person that's willing to do that's willing to sort of overreach than underreach and put it on them.
Absolutely. When Amanda was going through this loss, I can't tell you, there was like a sign-up sheet for people that would take the baby on an hour-long stroller walk.
Yeah.
Because the woman just needed an hour to maybe cry in the fetal position, maybe take a shower, maybe just be alone for a split second. And the amount of people that showed up to just be like, they didn't even know the baby. I mean, they were friends with them, but maybe they weren't close with the baby yet, but they were just like, I will take your baby on an hour-long walk around the neighborhood. And, my parents lost my sister. Meals would just show up on the front door, beautiful, fully cooked homemade meals with sometimes no note. Sometimes no expectations, just a beautiful lasagna put on the front porch. And it's those things. That's, and that's another thing the film is about, is about, getting by with a little help from your friends. It's about, and sometimes it's about the kindness of strangers. But it certainly is about showing up for someone suffering.
Well, speaking of your work, one of the things that I thought about during the pandemic, because I think I told you this, but so Garden State came out when I was a sophomore or a junior in high school. So it was like sort of perfectly timed for my generation. So was Scrubs. Scrubs came out, I guess, when I was a freshman in high school. And I remember in the pre-TiVo days, illegally downloading it so we could watch it because there was no reruns. But the thing I thought about most during the pandemic was the scene where they shout into the infinite abyss. And the reason I thought about it is I was reading about this moms group in Boston that would get together once a week in a public park outside, and they would all just scream as loud as they could together for like 20 minutes. I think that's
incredible.
Isn't that amazing?
That's incredible. Yeah, and by the way, I never did that. I always fantasized. It was like a fantasy of mine to scream into a giant infinite hole. It really was. It's not something you can just do in your backyard in Hollywood. But I really, now they have these break rooms where you can go and like break shit. Have you heard about this?
Yes, yes.
You suit up with like headgear and goggles and gloves, and you just can, no matter what you get, it's like there's different price points what you can break, and they give you a baseball bat, and you can just destroy things for catharsis. But I think that was just a fantasy. I mean, that really is a metaphor for the anxiety that I was feeling in my life. Just this fantasy of being able to scream it out of my body. Of course, and then kiss a beautiful Natalie
Sure.
Portman after. Yeah, that was the true. That was the extra cherry on top. But no, I think that was what I was. I was such an anxious. I have such anxiety in my body that I deal with, and for me in Garden State, particularly at that age of my life, it was a fantasy to just be able to just, as though you're fucking screaming at all of your agita, all of your negative things in your body into a hole that would just disappear. That was sort of a fantasy of mine.
No, I have the same fantasy, and I think there is this idea that stoicism or people who process grief, that it's about kind of stuffing it down, pretending it doesn't exist, or never processing it. I think the idea is it's better to go outside and scream into the void than to tell everyone you're okay and then scream at someone over a minor car accident or a shopping cart at the store or an employee who screws something up. Like, if you bottle it up or you stuff it in a closet, it will come out eventually, just not in a controlled or appropriate way.
Yeah. Isn't it fascinating to you? And I'm sorry, your listeners are I'm sure, well better educated on Stoicism than I. But isn't it fascinating to you that these writings are so old and so wise and pertinent and relevant today? I mean, that's what I've gotten from you. It's just some of these writings are more helpful to me in my daily life than things that have been written in the last 100 years. Very often.
Well, I think it's true in all forms of art, but comedy being a great example of it. Like, Garden State is your unique, very specific experience, and yet somehow it resonates to me across the country, younger than you, having different issues. I see the universality or the universal nature of it, right? And I think it is fascinating that 2,000 years ago, the private writings of the emperor, or conversely, the lectures of Epictetus, who's a slave, like there should be an unfathomable gulf between us, an incomprehensible distance between us.
We should have evolved, Ryan.
or we should just not be able to understand what life was like and what their experience was like, because it's so radically different than
but they're wrestling
us in the
with,
modern world.
Correct me if I'm wrong, they're wrestling with the exact same stuff.
Well, you talked about helping your friends there. One thing I often point people to, because someone will lose someone or a friend will lose someone, and they'll go like, what would the Stoics have to say about this? There's actually 3 essays that Seneca wrote called Consolations. One is to the daughter of a friend who had died. The other is to his mother. So Seneca loses a child, so his mother loses a grandchild. And then Seneca is exiled. He's going to be sent off, probably to die, to never see his family or his friends again. And there's one other one. I'm forgetting who the other one is too. But anyways, he writes these 2 essays, or these 3 essays, essentially consoling grieving friends. And it could have been written last week. It is, he's just walking them through. Like, my favorite part is he's talking to this woman whose father had died. And he goes, obviously, it's sad that your father has died. And here you are a year later, you can barely get out of bed. You're crying all the time. You're miserable. You don't want to go on living. He goes, your father would obviously hope you're sad that he's gone. But what would hurt him more than anything in the world would be to watch how much joy has gone out of your life by his absence.
Yeah, that's powerful.
It's so beautiful. And you're like, fundamentally, human beings have been wrestling with that sort of, temptation's the wrong word, but that sort of response to grief for 2,000 years. And the advice out of it that Seneca gives is just as true now as it was, right around the time Jesus was still alive. It's remarkable.
That's literally what I've said that to my mom, who continues to grieve my sister, the loss of her child. And, I've literally said a form of that so many times. Her name was Shoshana. So I would say, Shoshana would want you to be, of course, remembering her but she would also want you to have a full, incredible life and not do the things that were on your bucket list. She would want you to travel. She would want you to take up a hobby. She would want you to be belly laughing. Picture her watching you. That's what she would want.
They would feel terrible if they were the reason you were not doing those things.
Yeah, and think about that. If that's another good way to think about it, Ryan, is like, think about it like if it was us, if we were the ones that were gone, we of course wouldn't want everyone to just have a quick brunch and move on, but we also would be devastated if we looked down and saw it making someone suicidal, making them addicted to drugs, making them ruining their lives because of us. We would if there is an afterlife, we would be doing everything we could to try and communicate to please go on. Please don't have this be your demise.
Well, no, that's a very
powerful. It's a helpful way to think of it. I mean, I never really thought of it specifically like that, but I think that's helpful.
No, that's the very powerful part of the movie is the sister is sort of this. If you want to think about a form of life after death, the sister's sort of reappearance throughout the movie as a sort of a North Star or a bit of clarity to a number of the different characters in the movie, that is how we continue living after we die, is not just in the memory of people like, oh, hey, this person was nice, or hey, this person was beautiful, or whatever, but what did that person teach us, and how is it continuing to shape our behavior or hold us accountable or push us to do things in the present moment? That's multi-generational impact. That's a form of immortality.
Yeah, and are we honoring what they would want? I mean, that I think that's very helpful.
Yes,
it's certainly in my film A Good Person. The loss of Morgan's daughter is, like you said, she remains, even though she's not in the whole film physically. She remains such a powerful force because everyone is trying to navigate what they think she would want.
Yes.
And what they think her wishes would be, and trying to honor her by keeping those wishes alive. It's tricky to talk about without spoiling anything, but I'm tiptoeing around it. Yeah.
Yes, and if there are any spoilers in this episode, I would say still absolutely worth seeing. It's an incredible and moving movie.
Please don't not see the movie because I accidentally spoiled this something.
Well, and look, I think like when I read books, like when I read plays particularly, I always go like, the chance of me understanding everything that's happening as it's happening is about 0%. So I actually go and spoil stuff like before I consume it. If I know it's going to be good, like if it's operating at a high level, I go, I'm probably not going to. Yeah, exactly. I'm not going to watch this 5 times, so I'll spoil the ending.
There's a really great thing in Manhattan for actors. Every Broadway show, and I think a lot of off-Broadway shows, are filmed for archival purposes. They're never to be aired, and they're never to be used for monetary purposes. But if you go to the theater a lot, you may have occasionally been there on the night when they're videotaping it with 3 cameras, and it's all archived at Lincoln Center. And what they provide is you have to have a reason to watch it. You can't just be someone who just walks in there and says, "Hey, can I watch the Liev Schreiber production of Macbeth from the Public Theater?" But if you're an actor, is one reason. And what I would do when I was fresh out of Northwestern was I would have an audition for often at the Public Theater, which is the preeminent Shakespearean theater in Manhattan, and I would just be like, I don't know this play at all, and just reading it is way overwhelming. So let me go out to the library and watch a great production of it, and I would do that all the time, and that was really helpful to understanding the play. Was not only reading it but following along with a really well done production, and that then you go, oh, now I understand the play. So that just made me think of that.
No, totally. It's like watching it with subtitles on. Like you actually understand what's happening, and so you're able to understand the levels at which something is operating, as opposed to the subtext or whatever just sort of flying right past you.
Yeah, that's
the character that I actually thought was really interesting in the movie, and I guess I related to. I thought Molly Shannon's character was interesting in that, you know, just her sort of very limited emotional range. I don't mean Molly Shannon as an actor. I mean, I'm sure it was very difficult to act as someone who was so fundamentally stunted in the sense that, like, her daughter's basically dying and or killing herself, and she's like, hey, do you want to make some crafts from Etsy? Like, she so lacks the toolkit, but then also the emotional awareness in her own life to connect with this person who needs connection and vulnerability.
Yeah.
And
well, she doesn't have the skills. Like you said, she doesn't have this. She doesn't have the skill set. And not only that, she's a functioning alcoholic, casual Xanax chewer herself. So, she doesn't have the, this is not a woman who's has a skill set to deal. I mean, who would, to be honest? But this woman, this woman is not it was not fully equipped to get her daughter back in her life after a tragedy and try and nurse her back to health. Now, Florence's character is also initially physically injured severely in the accident herself. So, we jump a year ahead in the film, and so I didn't really want to write about recovering from the physical ailments. So I, as a writer, I skipped that because I really wanted to talk about the emotional recovery. So that's the reason she initially was prescribed OxyContin, as so many people are, for physical pain, and then they become reliant on it to numb their emotional pain. So Molly Shannon's character Diane is in no way does she have the skill set, and she's also medicating herself. And so when she tries to practice tough love with her daughter and tries to say, hey, we got to wean you off these pills, that's what everybody's saying. She like so many parents or loved ones or wives and husbands, she tries to take a stand and say no more. But then it's terrifying because her daughter goes missing for a time, and she does what so many people do, and that is retreat and go and enable, because it's terrifying. The devil which is just my daughter's an oxy addict at home, is better than the one you don't, which is my daughter's missing. And so I think that's a really, really tough place for her. And she's trying things like giving her mild pep talks. The one you're referencing is like, hey, maybe we can make money if we got into a craft together. We could sell them on Etsy. She's trying, but it's so feeble. But I thought that was real. I didn't want to have her mom be this all-knowing, amazing mom. That didn't feel real. What felt real to me was like, what about this blue-collar woman who has her own addiction issues and certainly just has no clue how to be a therapist to this woman.
Well, yeah, and obviously there's other forms of abuse in the movie, other sort of failures as parents. But when I look at that character, I didn't see someone who was changed by what happened, but someone who had probably been that way always, right?
Absolutely, that's right.
And so ultimately, the daughter sort of never had the support system, but also never saw sort of emotional resilience and processing and dealing. She would not have grown up with any. She would not have grown up developing any of the tools or seeing any of the kind of examples that she would have needed to, if she had any chance of dealing with this immense tragedy in her life.
I think that's well said, Ryan. I think, and I think this is certainly before the tragedy. This is certainly Florence's character is certainly someone who was probably rolling her eyes at her mother a lot with love, but being like, her mom drinks a lot, and her mom says inappropriate things, and her mom certainly, she loves her, but she certainly wasn't the rock and also super emotionally intelligent in a way of being able to help her through a crisis.
Yeah, no, I related to that. It's like you have these, even going back to like when you're like a young person, like in Garden State, you have this range of overwhelming emotions. You're intimidated by life. You're trying to find meaning and purpose in the world. And if the people you're living with are stunted or constrained, because of things that happened in their life, because of how they grew up, because of, I don't know, stereotypes or cultural understanding of, what a parent is supposed to be or not supposed to be, you end up not developing the emotional toolkit that you need to process and deal with those emotions. And I certainly, there's probably a sort of a boomer argument there, I guess, of that being a sort of an endemic style of parenting that a lot of people grew up with.
Yeah, for sure. But even the most skilled parent would probably be in over their head with what Molly Shannon's character is forced to deal with. Yeah.
Yes. I mean, even the most emotionally well-adjusted, in touch, empowered parent over the last 3 years is going to find themselves in a park in Boston shouting into the void because it's more than any human being can reasonably be expected to handle.
Exactly. And that's what came out. I think that's what the pandemic is for me. It's not a obvious surface character in the film, but it's for me it's completely a character in my psyche in the film, because it's the ultimate standing up from trauma for the whole world. Like, how do we, what we were saying in the micro example of the film, how do we stand up again? But I think in my mind was like, how does Earth stand up from this? This was so, like, who can even fathom how this will have impacted us? We need a decade's worth of time to look back on, see how it affected, our emotional well-being. I mean, think of the children in the schools and everyone. I can't imagine what we're going to find out.
Well, yeah, and you think about Florence's character in the movie, and part of the trauma for her is not just that it happened, but that there's a sort of denial of her experience and her suffering because other people's grief and suffering comes first, right? And I think if you think about the pandemic, it's obviously traumatic, obviously tragic. Different people felt it in different ways, and then what do you do with those feelings in a society where a good chunk, literally millions of people deny that it exists or want to move on from it very quickly or want to sort of point fingers about it, right? Like how does it's probably maybe it's like a similar, okay, in World War II, this is a shared global experience, right? So everyone deals with it. And so everyone's at least kind of living in the same reality. And then you contrast that with a generation later, the experience in Vietnam, where it's not doled out equally and the trauma is left to people alone. Society has a different way of dealing with that. And there's still consequences for that to this day. Morgan Freeman's character in the movie being an example of that.
Yeah. He's a Vietnam vet. Yeah, that's really well said, man. I don't want to go down the wormhole on this, but it was an extra level of hard being on the front lines at the beginning of the pandemic, watching a 41-year-old die and slowly fade away, with people saying this is not real and this doesn't affect young people and all of that stuff. That was advanced.
Right. Like the glibness of, this is only affecting old people. That might be true at a larger statistical level, but that's particularly devastating for the exceptions to that trend to hear.
Of course. Yeah. Of course. And, people didn't want to believe it. They'd be like, he must have had a pre-existing condition. Like it's almost like that gave people solace, thinking like, well, he must have had a pre-existing condition. And you're like,
even if he did,
no.
So what?
No, but I mean, he did, in this particular case, he didn't. I mean, of course, I'm
Right.
sure there's examples of people who did, but he didn't. And so, anyway.
But no, there is sort of a societal urge to find. I think we do this in a lot of tragedies. We do this, unfortunately, now that everything's so politicized. Is like something terrible happens. An unarmed Black man is shot in the streets by the police, or a pandemic happens, or I don't know. There's a train crash in Ohio, and we try to find a reason that we don't have to care about it because it affects either people we don't like, or it was caused by people we don't like, or whatever, right? We try to find a way to explain it away or minimize it or make it something contentious instead of having to sit with the sadness and the awfulness of it and then go to what we were talking about earlier, that place of there, but for the grace of God go I.
Yeah, and compassion. How do we get out of that, Ryan? You're the genius philosopher. Can you solve this for us?
Here's the thing. I think at a community level, human beings do a really good job, right? As you said, right? The casserole arrives on your doorstep. People rush to the scene. The problem is when these things are filtered through media or it's far away, that I think there's a part of us that just doesn't. We'd rather we want to find a reason that it's not horrible, that it could happen to us. Seneca has this in one of the essays. He talks about how your neighbor dies, and your instinct is think, oh, that's so bad for them, that's so sad for them. There's some defensive part of us that doesn't want to let it in enough that we would go, that could happen to me, that could happen to someone I love, so by politicizing it or trying to explain it away, I think we're just fundamentally being defensive because we don't want the vulnerability of having to accept a world where, as they say, bad things happen to good people. We want to find a reason that they're bad people, and thus we're not vulnerable.
Yeah, but you're right though. It's interesting that that it happens less on the communal in the micro, perhaps. Yes. I don't know if that's true, but it feels like it does.
I think so. So how have you processed all of that grief? What is that? I mean, obviously this movie seems like it was, therapeutic and something to throw yourself into, but I can't imagine you just said time heals all wounds. So you've probably had to do some of the work that we're talking about.
I did a lot of work. I did a lot of reading. I have an incredible therapist that is a cognitive behaviorist, which is very helpful to me. It's not so much about the style of therapy is not so much about talking about the pain of the past, but talking about specific strategies and systems to put in place to get past things and to reach goals and to deal with the negative thoughts that come up. So there's sort of a system in place to help you. To me, it's a bit more of a practical way of receiving therapy than in other ways I've tried. So there's that, and really, I guess I have to say that the communal experience of sharing a good person has been very healing for me, because now that I'm finally showing it to audiences, and you see people's reaction, I feel the community of sharing the film and seeing people's reactions to it, and that makes my heart glow, because I feel that people see themselves in the story, that people see that there's community in experiencing the emotional pain. And there's something very healing in that it's really a salve for loneliness, if you will. That's really been the most powerful thing that's come out of this is feeling less lonely by sharing what I made.
Yeah, I think that's the idea. That's the artist's sort of gift, and then also duty is that you have these feelings and you have a place to put them, which is your work. But if you don't, because you're afraid or because it's hard or you're, whatever, you're also not helping people in a way that you're able to help people.
I think it's win-win in a sense that the artist gets help by saying, I have to do something with these emotions. Let me funnel them into art, like that quote you started this episode with. And then if it's a successful piece and engaging success solely by it's resonating with a group of people, then it's helpful to them. I mean, how many times I can't even think of how many times I've watched a film and shed a tear and had a laugh and gone, oh my God, I feel so seen. I feel so, I'm not alone. I'm not crazy. That movie it's like that writer was writing for me. That is my life. That reminds me of that horrible, breakup I went through, or that reminds me of my parents' divorce and how hard it was. And, that's the genius of great art. And of course, and great writing, not just fiction, powerful. Sure. I mean, I have so many, including your book, so many nonfiction books that have helped me, and instruct me. And it's just so wonderful when you go, oh my God, Eureka! Did I need to read this today?
Totally. And then, that is part of the process by which one is able to see with time that there was a silver lining, or whatever you want to call it, which is that, by what I went through, other people had to go through it less bad, or a community emerged that wouldn't have existed before, or there are people walking around alive that would not have been alive had they not been reached at a certain moment or been given
Absolutely.
hope. That's the most beautiful thing.
Absolutely. I mean, these two people save each other from themselves is what I keep thinking and saying, about them, is that they're the last two people in the world you would expect to form a friendship, and they literally save each other from themselves.
So one of my favorite songs that I ever found came from Scrubs, the Guided by Voices song, Hold On to Hope.
Okay.
And given what you have gone through, and then given the, less than uplifting themes, at least at the beginning of the movie in the last couple of years, what keeps you hopeful? What keeps you going?
What keeps me hopeful? The sun. I discovered by 47 years old that I like to be in a warm climate. I know you do too. You're down in Texas, but what keeps me hopeful?
Minnesota seems like a hard place to be optimistic.
Yeah, I know some people can do it, but for me, I got really clear. I grew up in Jersey, and Jersey by no means has an easy winter. And I went to school in Evanston, Illinois, which, I mean, there were days when with the wind chill, it was negative 65. But I realized at a certain point that that was not a mentally healthy place for me personally to be. I don't think I have the seasonal affective disorder thing, or for all I know, maybe I do. But I do know that I have more serotonin in the warm climate.
Yeah.
What keeps me hopeful is just trying to seize the day, trying to create stuff that is meaningful. Sometimes it's comedic and makes people laugh. Hopefully, sometimes it's more dramatic, like this, with a mix of laughter. But that's what keeps me hopeful. Is just being. What brings me the most joy is being able to create stuff like this, like a good person, and share it. That's what really brings me hope and pleasure and joy.
How do you deal with the sort of Hollywood world in which it takes so long for one of those things to come into existence and so many moving pieces?
Well, that's such a good question, Ryan. I think that I have to find other things. I directed Ted Lasso. I directed this new show, Shrinking, with Harrison Ford, that I really recommend to your audience. It's really good. So I take on, and of course I act for other people, not just, being just a filmmaker. would be very frustrating because it takes so long and it's so hard to get anything made. And so I take on lots of different things so that I work, because working makes me happy. Like, my work is not something I dread. My work is something that I love. I mean, I dread writing a bit, but when I'm directing and when I'm acting, I think Lawrence Kasdan is the one who said being a writer is signing up to have homework for the rest of your life, and sometimes it certainly feels that way. But I get a lot of pleasure out of directing and acting and so that's what I do. If I was just sitting around waiting for films to come together, it would be just a very lonesome life, because so many things have to fall into place. Particularly, indies like this movie. The financing comes together and falls apart 20 times before it's actually real.
Yeah, to go to the idea of like what's in your control and what's not in your control, I think as one thinks about how one organizes one's career, the more control you have over your output, your work, probably the closer you're going to be to happiness and the further away you're going to be from despair. And it strikes me that your line of work, that's a razor's edge that one is walking.
Of course, because you don't, and that's why the independent film is like one of the last bastions of making something that with very little corporate involvement and people weighing in, because you really can sort of make something that is specifically your sensibility without an extraordinary amount of executives weighing in and saying, hey, this should be that, and the test research says this. I mean, it is sort of a place where you can really just, if and when you're lucky enough to have it come together, you can really just say what you want to say.
Well, I'm very glad you persevered and let me see the movie. I thought it was beautiful and moving, and I really, really enjoyed it. And I think it's gonna help a lot of people.
Thank you, Ryan. And I just want to say again, thank you for all that you're doing. I think you're educating so many people, including myself. I knew nothing about the writings of these incredible writers, and you really introduced me to so many things. And I love your books, and I want you to know that what a positive energy and words you're putting out there into the universe that can be very negative, and I want to thank you for that.
Well, right back at you. That's a very full circle moment for me to hear. Do you still have that Seneca quote board that you showed me?
Oh yeah. Well, it's funny because I have this board that sort of was cycling through quotes, but then I realized that like 14 days in, it only had like 12 quotes. So I was like, I got to take it off of this because I know those quotes. It didn't have an infinite, but I really, what I just got is kind of geeky, but I got a Stoic Quotes little flip calendar. Literally it was like $7, but it was just, every day of the week, every day of the year, you flip it and it has an empowering quote, and that's something I like. I have it on in my bathroom in my sink, so it's the first thing I read each morning to put a little positive inspiration into my day.
Well, I all the power to the person that made this $7 one, but I have one. I'll send it to you because I do one for Daily Stoic. That is the quote from the Daily Stoic every single day. So I'll send it to you.
All right, well, send it to me because I already bought this one for $7, so I can't possibly.
Well, this one is much, much better. It's much, much, much better.
I'm sure the cardstock is way better.
I found the quote you had, and I think this is actually it could be straight out of the movie. The quote from Seneca that you had on your wall was, "A gem cannot be polished without friction, nor a man perfected without trials."
Yeah, that could be right out of my film. Yeah.
It could.
Thank you. Yeah. All right, man.
Thanks so much. All right, here, let's hit stop and we'll make sure this gets uploaded.